candidate Walz is very different than Governor Walz. And we like to stress that because right now he's kind of being portrayed as a moderate again, good for rural voters. But his policies are very bad for rural voters.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm co-host Jake Fogleman. With me is my co-host Amy Cooke in studio today.
Yeah, made it back.
That's right. Back in where it's not so humid and there's not as many bugs trying to bite you at every opportunity.
I'm keeping all of my blood inside of me right now.
That's right. So this week we're going to do something a little bit different. As everyone watching this, I'm sure, is already well aware, we are in a presidential election year. And with presidential elections comes big potential for changes in policy one way or another. So heading into the election, as we get closer to November, we're going to do some episodes breaking down what the different administration possibilities might mean for energy policy. And this week presents an interesting opportunity to focus on one particular candidate. So Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was named Kamala Harris's vice presidential nominee. He was just in Denver for a ritzy fundraiser this week. And so we thought that provided a good opportunity to maybe dive into Tim Walz's background. And there's no one better to do that than someone that spent the last few years researching his policies in the state of Minnesota. He's a past guest of PowerGab, Mitch. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, I should say.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Mitch, obviously, with Tim Walz being on the Kamala Harris ticket, everyone's talking about his track record as governor of Minnesota. Obviously, this is an energy and environmental focused show. What can you tell us about Tim Walz's philosophy on energy and environmental policy?
Well, the interesting thing is he I don't know if he actually has one of his own. He borrows all the policies from Western states like California. He's very unoriginal. He literally copies or makes worse. I guess that's the only slice of originality that he has, is he makes already bad policies even worse. And the other thing is he campaigns as a moderate. He comes off as a very, moderate Democrat. But when he gets elected, he shifts so far to the left that, you can't, the candidate Walz is so different from the governor Walz. And there's a few examples of that we'd like to point out. One of them, this was probably the worst one because he had to retract his proposal, but it was the gas tax. He proposed a 20% gas tax when he became governor, even though as candidate Walz, he said, we'll do a modest increase in the gas tax. Well, that 20-cent increase would have put Minnesota at the fourth highest gas tax in the nation, right? So candidate Walz is very different than Governor Walz. And we like to stress that because right now he's kind of being portrayed as a moderate again, good for rural voters. But his policies are very bad for rural voters. One in particular was the oil pipeline, the Enbridge Line 3 oil pipeline replacement. This was built in 1968. It's been operating at half capacity due to safety concerns. And as candidate Walz, he was all in favor of replacing this pipeline. The Minnesota Public Utility Commission had already voted to approve it. He said the PUC ruled, we need to follow the process in place. Literally, as soon as he became governor and was elected, he started delaying the project. He argued against it with extremist energy groups like Sierra Club. They argued that we didn't even need the oil, which is not true. He made this new criteria of oil pipelines getting approval. He said they not only need a building permit, they need a social permit. And I always found that interesting because in polls, the majority of Minnesotans approved and supported the Line 3 oil pipeline replacement. So I'm not sure what social groups were involved in that permitting process for this social permit. But also, rural voters were the largest demographic region to vote in favor of this Line 3 oil pipeline replacement. And so it's almost like he completely forgot about rural voters in his decision to delay this project. Um, and, as far as copying California style policies, the first one that I find really egregious because he didn't even wait for legislative approval was the California zero emissions mandate for EVs. And he just instructed the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to meet these mandates without legislative approval, without anything like that. He forced auto dealers to stock 14,000 electric vehicles on the lots in the first year of the program. James Dickey, who we worked with in Minnesota, he's a lawyer at the Upper Midwest Law Center. He argued that this provision that Walz exploited didn't even grant the agency the power to do this. Similar to the current administration, the current administration of Biden and Harris. They use Section 111 rules to regulate greenhouse gas emissions on the nation's power plants in ways that Section 111 doesn't grant. And so that's why I say if Walz Harris gets in to office and the energy policies of Walz follows him, then you're going to see the same exploitation of policies that don't give them the authority to do it, but they kind of just push the limit on everything they can. So if he gets into office and this follows him, he's going to be the same, if not worse, than the current administration. And the policy that I work with the most is his carbon-free mandate. This is another example of how Walz campaigned as a moderate and then switched far left as soon as he got into office. He ran on a 50% renewable energy mandate by 2030. He still opposed nuclear, which made it into the final bill. But in 2019, after he got election, he endorsed a 100% carbon-free mandate by 2050. And then in 2021, he shaved 10 years off that mandate and required 100% by 2040. Now, this is the legislation that actually ended up being law. And so when we modeled this policy, this 100% carbon-free mandate by 2040, we found that it would increase costs by $313 billion, and it would increase the risk of blackouts tremendously. And so if we can get that graph up here, when we modeled the policy, it showed, when we stress tested the system for variable weather, it showed a massive 55-hour blackout in the dead of winter in Minnesota, which I don't think I have to explain, but that will risk people's lives, right? That could actually lead to people dying from freezing.
So tell us what we're looking at here, Mitch, because we have polled voters in Colorado, and we also did it when I was in North Carolina. Two things that they're really worried about. And these are the voters that Walz has been, Kamala Harris chose him in part for his, what do they call it, folksy kind of demeanor. Yeah. And the very people that he is tasked with sort of securing the victory for her in November are, sort of middle Americans, Midwest values or middle class values. And when we polled voters, we found the two things that concern them the most: reliability, in other words, blackouts, and the other one is cost. So, right. Mitch, explain, you talked about the cost, but explain this graph, what we are seeing here on the screen right now.
In summary, this is the hourly load shape of a electricity system built with renewables, wind, solar, and battery storage. Now, something to keep in mind when you're looking at this is electricity on the system is supplied instantaneously, right? Even if you have storage, as soon as I plug something into to an outlet, that storage or another facility has to release electricity into the system. And so this is showing that system. The black line is the demand. So like energy users consuming energy. And all these, cool colors are the energy sources providing for that electricity, except for the red part. The red part is the area where the system fails to meet the demand that, families and businesses are demanding, right? And so this is in January 27th to February 1st. So dead of winter, some of the coldest months in Minnesota. And you can see at the start, the wind and solar and battery storage are providing enough electricity to meet demand. But as soon as, in January 28th, the battery storage runs out of batteries, right? It runs out of electricity storage, and there's not enough wind and solar on the system because there's a massive drought right now in the system that's preventing the wind and solar to charge the batteries. Now, this is a common theme that we see in all of our modeling projects when we stress test for variable and extreme weather. There's always massive wind droughts, and you're kind of playing Russian roulette when you build a system like this, hoping and praying that it doesn't happen during winter months when it matters most. When you look at the blackout in Texas, this is a very similar event, right? Texas relied on wind to provide peak demand, which is just like, peak demand could be daily or it could be annually, but just the highest amount of energy that's being consumed in any hour. Texas is relying on wind to provide that reliability, and it failed. There was no wind when those blackouts in 2021 happened. And the same thing would happen in Minnesota in an event like this if Tim Walz's policies were to take hold. And this is law in Minnesota, so this could happen in the future if they go through with it. And if these policies follow him to the vice presidency, if they get elected, the nation will experience the same things.
So coming to a state near you, Colorado, we've modeled Colorado. We have found the same thing because Colorado is openly hostile to nuclear, so there will be no base load. If Governor Polis gets his way, and I feel certain Governor Polis and Governor Walz know each other well. But explain one thing. Talk about, just real quickly so that listeners know and viewers know, you guys, when you stress test, what you're looking at is what the weather, you're looking at weather patterns too. Like, what has the historical weather pattern been in Minnesota at the end of January, beginning of February? And then explain one other thing about that. What we have done with peak load if we electrify heating in states like Minnesota, states like Colorado.
Right. Yeah. So the first part, right? Yeah. We take historical weather patterns of wind and solar. And because what I said at the beginning of that was electricity has to be supplied instantaneously, right? And wind and solar, you can't ramp that up. If the wind is not blowing, you can't ramp that up. If the sun is not shining, you can't. Or if there's cloud coverage, because you saw in that graph, solar, there should have been a lot more on the system, and it might have been a cloudy or a rainy day or something. But if anything like that happens, your system can't produce that electricity, right? Wind and solar are very bad bets to maintain the reliability of the system. And so other people, when they model these things, they understand this, right? So they do two things particularly. One is they model technologies that don't exist yet, right? Like hydrogen, or they call it firm peaking dispatchable because they don't even have a name for it yet, right? It doesn't exist. This carbon-free dispatchable, which just means reliable, in other words, right? You can put fuel in it and it'll ramp up if you need it. And then the other thing they do is they reduce demand, which just means they ration electricity to consumers. Right. They make you maintain the reliability for them because they can't supply it for you. Right. And forgive me, what was the second question?
The other, God, no, I can't remember.
What would electrification in a place like Minnesota do to that peak demand?
Yeah, the heat pumps. If we have to move, as we move towards this complete electrification, what happens to states that now you're going to get, your peak demand you're going to have a winter peaking system.
Right. Yeah. And we've seen that in a number of cases. We did that in Colorado. We're doing it right now in the New England states. And what we see when you electrify not only home heating, but the vehicle industry, you see that the peak demand, which again is just the highest, maximum hour of electricity usage, people charge their cars during the peak demand already. So you're just going to be basically doubling the peak demand. And the system, it's important to remember, the system builds for peak demand. You have to build to meet the highest demand on the system. And so EVs basically double that. And then home heating adds another factor into that, because in the winter, people are using electricity to heat their homes, but they're also using natural gas. And so if you just convert natural gas to electricity, now all of a sudden that peak demand is rising again because it happens at the same time. And they like to say, the other side likes to say that, oh, well, heat pumps have a higher, efficiency, but not that's true, but not at lower temperatures. When you get at the lower the temperature is, the worse that efficiency is. And at a certain point, at a certain low temperature, the heat pumps shut off. So you need a backup electricity source to heat your home still. And so you're back to that 1-to-1. And so in Minnesota, it does get cold enough to turn those heat pumps off at a certain temperature. And when that happens, you're back to a 1-to-1 ratio of efficiency. And so that peak demand is just through the roof again. And so when we modeled Minnesota, we didn't do any type of growth for demand like that. And so when you add in Governor Tim Walz's EV mandates, and if he ever decides to do heat pump mandates, this will increase the cost and the likelihood for blackouts.
Absolutely. Getting back to Walz, sort of where he stands and maybe where he may stand if he gets elected. I know Minnesota has a couple of nuclear power plants on the system, but you also have a moratorium on building new nuclear plants. Does he support that moratorium? Does he support repealing the moratorium? What can we expect? Because, to the Biden administration's credit, they've been pro-nuclear through their Department of Energy. Would we see the same thing in a hypothetical Walz-Harris administration?
Well, he signed the law that excluded new nuclear, and that's why I say, you pointed out that the current administration is actually becoming more friendlier to nuclear power, and that's why I say he might actually be worse than the current administration if he keeps these same policies of no new nuclear. He will be worse than the current administration. Nuclear power is the best way. If decarbonizing the grid is your goal, right? Nuclear is the best way to go about it because it's the only baseload, dispatchable, reliable, inexpensive form of energy that we have that's emissionless as well. So yeah, that's a great point. He did exclude new nuclear in his bill. If that follows him, he will be worse and more extreme than the current administration.
Did he give a reason for excluding nuclear, for signing that bill and agreeing to that? Because the thing is, Minnesota's used to nuclear. You have nuclear on your grid right now.
Right. I don't know exactly what he has said, if he has said anything about it, but the case against nuclear is pretty much always the same. What do you do with disposing the spent fuel? The word nuclear sounds scary, So in Minnesota, there's been a big push not only to exclude new nuclear, but to get the existing nuclear power plants off the system. The Sierra Club is really instrumental in trying to get those plants closed. It just seems like it flies in the face of decarbonizing the grid. These are, no carbon power facilities that don't emit anything, and they still want to wage war against that. And I always ask why. Why is it that you are so dead set on wind and solar only? And that just smells like, to me, like special interests and stuff like that, where you're not actually concerned about the goal of decarbonizing the grid. You just want wind, solar, and battery storage, that don't work and won't work in the future, So I don't know exactly what he said, but I feel like the case is always pretty much the same. Nuclear is scary, and we don't like it.
I was going to ask, is he popular? I mean, what didn't he get reelected in 2022?
Yep. He runs as a moderate, and at least in Minnesota, that's been very successful for him. He kind of looks like everyone's, uncle up there, right? Like I'll be honest, he looks like my family, right? Like he just has this Minnesota feel. You feel like you can, relate to him, and that's how he runs. He really plays onto that. But then as soon as he's elected, he goes extreme, right? And it's like people in Minnesota, I'm not sure if they pay attention or if they care, but he gets the extreme people with his policies, but he also gets the middle people by just presenting himself as moderate. And I'm not sure how, in tune those people are, but his policies are anything but moderate.
That's sort of the, much ink has been spilled over this is increasingly becoming a vibes-based race. And you're right, the vibe is that he's Midwestern, folksy, popular, moderate, center of the road. But I appreciate you providing some clarity on his actual governing track record, because if he gets in office, governing is going to be the point, not just vibes.
Not just who's weirder.
That's right. As we're coming up on time here, Amy, unless you have final questions, I'd like to...
I actually want to say one final thing. Look up Substack, Energy Bad Boys, Green New Walls, because if you want to know what a Harris-Walz administration may look like on energy and environmental policy, to Mitch's point, it could be worse than Gavin Newsom. I think you might be right. So if that is the case, and there is it's a lengthy expose on Governor Walz's policies on energy as governor of Minnesota, and I think we can expect the same thing to come if he's elected. So
yeah,
I just wanted to point that out.
We'll link to it in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So takeaways. I have a couple of things. Don't fall for Walz. As a moderate, campaigns as a moderate, campaigns as your favorite uncle, only to pick your pocket and take your wallet. And I'd say that's the other thing for Coloradans. Be aware of this. Prices in Minnesota, the cost of powering your home has gone up dramatically in Minnesota and is continuing to rise. And Colorado's already experienced that. You're going to get a lot more of that under this administration. So take that away. The other thing you're going to get are blackouts, so get yourself a generator. And I am deadly serious on that. When you look at 55 hours of shortfalls in a state like Minnesota, you can't. People will die in that kind of with those kind of blackouts.
No, that's absolutely right. As always, get a generator. Mitch, we want to thank you again for coming on the show. Do you want to tell the listeners where they can find some of your work that you publish?
Yeah. Right now we are at Always On Energy Research. That's AOER.org. Right, Amy? I got that right?
No. Close.
AOenergy.org.
AOenergy.org. AOenergy.org.
It's a new website. But then also at our Substack, Isaac Orr and my Substack, Energy Bad Boys. Like Amy said, you can find a lot of this information on our most recent piece, Green New Walls, it's titled, where you'll see everything I just said and more about his energy policies.
Excellent. Listeners should definitely check that out. But thank you again for joining us. And listeners, if you enjoyed that episode and you want to check out the rest of what we do here, head on over to iitv.org for our entire back catalog. We've got new episodes every single week. We're also available on audio, wherever you get your audio podcasts, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you want to suggest future show topics, future guests, feel free to reach out at info@powergab.org. We love to hear from you guys. But until next week, we'll see you.